Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on part 2 of the Suisei no Gargantia OVA, Meguru Koro Haruka, which as of the time of this recording came out in the last week and a half, and I've been waiting very sort of, on the edge of my seat for them to actually get around to subbing this thing, and I gotta say, it was finally subbed as of the time of this recording, but it was really not that well done. I guess it's fair to say. It was very much like somebody took the entire script and passed it through Google Translate and didn't then take the, follow-up procedure of having it make a sort of sense. It's very broken English, at least the version that I saw of it. But it was not without its very compelling and intriguing aspects, if not for being feeling very condensed. It almost feels like they could have made this 3 parts, a 3-part OVA, because there's a lot of stuff that happens in this that just feels like, blink and you'll miss it, and they probably should have spent a little more time fleshing it out. Now, I don't know what the production, situation was behind the scenes, and whether or not, they had a crunch or a time crunch or a financial crunch, whatever it was, to sort of make this play out that way, that I felt like they could have delved a little further into things. But we are pretty much picking up with that just gangbusters revelation of Lima possessing a machine caliber. And I had this overhanging question of, like, does she hail from the future as well? Did she sort of pass through a wormhole, sort of come back in time and land on Earth the same way Leto did? All those kinds of things are going around your mind when you see she has this thing. But it's actually revealed in this particular second half of the OVA that that's not the case at all. She actually, although I should say, she hails from somewhere unexpected, in that she hails from the continent. There's a very ominous sort of air about referencing the continent all throughout this OVA, because apparently there's an as yet 1,000-year war still unfolding, and she is kind of a sleeper cell who's sent into Gargantia with this particular, machine caliber. I guess they were trying to utilize KanColle and his fleet along similar means, and they got sidled up with Gargantia because of the marriage of those two sort of continents or countries or whatever you want to call it, Gargantia and KanColle's fleet, the remnants of KanColle's fleet. And so she sort of pinpoints Leto, knowing that he has some history and he was the key factor in taking down KanColle and all that kind of stuff. They figure he's the technological genius who can try to awaken this machine caliber and turn the tide in the continental wars that are still unfolding. And she's going to try to do everything she can, from even going so far as to not only reveal the machine caliber to Leto, but try to get at Leto from the side of his romance with Amy and her little brother Bevel, who is wheelchair stricken. He can do some walking and standing on his own, but for long trips, as he says, he's confined to a wheelchair, sort of mechanoid chair. And she's kind of passing along the idea that, well, if you come to the continent, we can heal him, we can make him better, anything to entice them to consider leaving Gargantia behind and effectively leading the war and turning the tide to whatever faction they represent's favor. And that's absolutely compelling, because Lima as a character, we find that she has spent the singular most amount of time with this particular machine caliber. An earlier version, per Leto's words, sort of a prototype equivalent. And it's intriguing because this thing starts to perceive and understand like there's a connection between it and her. It begins to see her as its pilot, in the similar manner to how Chamber, Leto's machine caliber, saw him as its pilot. But this is a learning curve that unfolds throughout the course of the OVA, and it's somewhat surprising, but it's also intriguing because, as I say, Lima is a character, she lived a life very sort of on her own, and she put her all into trying to make sense of the mechanics of this machine caliber, and she didn't really have a social life. She didn't really have a sense of normalcy. Connecting with this machine was more normal than anything else she could consider doing, and so she has a very emotional connection to it, and that comes heavily into play at a key moment when her continental forces who have warships of their own, they haven't heard from her. And they're like, all right, forget this. We're going to move on our own. We're going to take Leto. We're going to take, his girlfriend and force him into action for our benefit. And it gets very intriguing because there are little footnotes like, they've found this sort of floating fortress, if you will, where they can stockpile Gargantia and try to, get as much food and replenishing fuel because they have so many new people to take care of as part of Kugel's fleet is now, part of their whole framework. And this is, there are scenes where they let their hair down, they swim with dolphins, and it's the first time Leto's actually seen them up close. And it gets really charming, and you see that this is kind of turning the tide in the opinion of what Lima was sent to do. She's starting to reconsider what she's sent to do because she understands. This would fundamentally ask, Leto and Amy and all these people to give up a life of prosperity and sort of peaceful tidings. And she doesn't see that as fair anymore, which is why she's been biding her time. And she keeps telling people who are working their part of that, sleeper cell that has infiltrated Gargantia and are trying to wait to make the move to take Leto and everything, she's telling them to hold off and bide her time and try to come up with some kind of excuse or some kind of reasoning as to let it go and leave Leto to his own devices and the life he now has. But unfortunately, that connectivity comes into play with this machine caliber at a time when these forces decide to make their move and go on the attack. And it's quite fascinating because this machine caliber, because of the connectivity, it comes alive on its own in a similar fashion to how we might see Chamber protect Leto in the series proper of Suisei no Gargantia. But it's like, why? How has it developed any sort of connectivity to Lima, somebody who is of this world, who, this thing, I guess, was unearthed from centuries past, and it still works and it still runs, whatever fuels it, But it has, there's an algorithm that it has that is a sort of translation matrix, which plays into, actually, how we open the entire OVA. Basically Leto and Bevel are overlooking this, I guess it's like a matrix of information that hails back to centuries past that they found at the ocean depths. And when they awaken this, they begin to understand, hey, these people, in our history, they were actually developing AI, but they were developing a translation matrix. So this is where it comes into play when the continental armies, if you will, their battleships go on the attack. And this machine caliber, which Lima has actually named Meguru, it comes alive and it protects her. And she's able to, with sort of just a few brief instructions by Leto, how to, pilot the thing sort of mentally, think about your objective and this machine caliber will do it. She leaves him behind after he rescues Amy, and she just effectively takes out the continental warship fleet. And then everything is kind of left hanging overhead, like she feels so guilty. And she feels like she has given up entirely any, placement within Gargantia, having been effectively an enemy to that way of life and all the people, all the friends she made. And this coincides, one of the reasons why I talk about this being very sort of condensed is because there's one singular scene where we see Pinion going after this woman who looks very much like Luckage and apparently completely unaware that it is her. She's supposed to be like undercover and going to gather information or whatever it is. She's the only other character with the same hair color as Luckage. So how you could miss it, I'm sitting there, I'm like, that's Luckage. What the hell? But she comes into play. It turns out she has decided to give up this life of prosperity and sort of romance with Pinion. She's kind of tired of just living and letting live. She wants to go back to piracy, the sort of prevailing factor of her character from the series proper, Suisei no Gargantia. And she's done so. She's helped the attack against these continental forces, and she's the one who, in the end, ends up taking up Lima and saying, hey, why don't you come along with us? You don't feel like you fit in there. I don't feel like I fit in there. We'll be one with traveling the oceans and whatever like that. And Lima decides, even though she leaves Leto and Amy pleading for her not to go, she decides to go with Luckage. And I found that to be intriguing because, like I say, there's one whole scene. I think Luckage appears in two whole scenes, one as herself, or rather two as herself, one in the beginning, one at the end, but then one in the middle where it's just sort of a fleeting footnote where she's undercover and in disguise and pinning on this guy who's been making moves on her all this time, doesn't even realize it's her, head-scratchingly. And so I feel like they should have fleshed this out to a third OVA chapter, if you will. But overall, by the end, I was compelled by the idea that somebody could work their way inside the brain AI matrix of a machine caliber in a similar fashion to how Leto piloted Chamber. And somebody completely the antithesis to whatever sort of soldier lifestyle Leto was. And this machine caliber Misc, it seemed to almost care about this girl in a similar fashion to how we saw, Chamber. He sacrificed himself to save Leto in the, finale of the series proper. And with much less, well, arguably much less time on Lima's part, having been spent with this machine caliber, it still developed a similar connection, a similar connectivity. And what does that say about artificial intelligence and humankind? It's very a brief glimpse of that exploration of the divide between man and machine. And for that, I still really enjoyed this OVA, even though I did feel it was largely overly condensed and should have been fleshed out more. And, Gargantia is just one of those series where the more you give me, the more I'll swallow up anyway. But I still did enjoy this particular story. At the end, we have sort of this happy ending with Gargantia. They've successfully built a brand new mothership to account for all the extra people they've taken on since, Kugel's fleet, they've taken all those people onto their own fleet and everything like that, and they've expanded, and so they built this new mothership so that prosperity will reign. And we have a decree from Leto himself. He was very personally affected by all of this and the questions it raises, but by the end he's like, none of it matters, because at the end of the day, I'm going to stick with Gargantia, and more importantly, and he's saying this to Amy, I'm going to stick with you, and I'm going to protect you, and we will share our lives together in peace and harmony as much as possible. And she wells up with tears, and I'm happy to see them embrace. And so, it was a really well-rounded, if wholly condensed OVA chapter. Again, I was just so happy to revisit this world, and I really wish we could have seen it maybe fleshed out a little bit more, but I'm happy with what we got, as condensed as it felt. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of the OVA, the second half of Meguru Koro Naruka, if you've seen it, or Haruka rather, of Suisei no Gargantia, and if you could make it through, if you could stomach the very poorly translated subs, as I say, the version I saw, just broken English aplenty, and it really took some thinking as I was watching it to try to piece it together, what exactly was being said, and but it was still enjoyable, and hopefully we'll eventually get like a DVD Blu-ray release where it's actually dubbed with the same cast as the original series when that was released on DVD. So otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. I hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.